Jerusalem Online, I'm Mike Greenspan. Is Ron Arad alive? And if so, where is he? Israelis have been asking that question since the Air Force navigator's plane was shot down over Lebanon 8.5 years ago. This week, an Iranian defector in the U.S. and a German tourist recently released from an Iranian prison claimed to know the answer, that Arad is being held in a Tehran jail. Despite initial doubts about the reliability of the information, Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin announced that Israel holds Iran directly responsible for Ron Arad's welfare. Also in the public eye this week, a topsy-turvy Tel Aviv stock exchange and signs of instability in the Israeli economy. At issue in the Israeli cabinet, will interest rates drop? Will the Israeli taxpayer be left with a little bit more in his pocket? And one more headline, a new man at the helm of the Jewish Agency. Member of Parliament Avraham Burg took over as acting chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel this week. That's the organization that coordinates policy between Israel and the Jewish world and channels funds into projects aimed at bringing in immigrants and settling them down in Israel and a variety of other things. But the Jewish Agency has many other priorities. We're going to examine them when we meet with incoming chairman Avraham Burg on this week's look at the people and the stories behind the news. What's more, we'll take you south to Mitzpeh Ramon to explore the mysterious craters of Israel's largest natural wonderland, the Negev Highlands. We'll take you to a Jerusalem operating room where an audience of thousands looked on as a revolutionary new cardiac procedure was demonstrated. And we'll introduce you to a young Israeli singer who's been around for a long, long time. This and more, but first, Avraham Burg is only 40 years old, which, in Israeli political terms, makes him little more than a young whippersnapper. On the other hand, Burg, a Labour Party member of Israel's parliament and chairman of the Knesset's Committee of Education and Culture, was recently chosen to become chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel, the body which unites Israelis and world Jewry, overseeing matters of interest to them both. Avraham Burg is my first guest. Welcome.
Shalom.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
And let's look into some apparent contradictions in your background.
Hey.
You've been an officer in the Israeli paratrooper, and on the other hand, you've led protests against Israel's war in Lebanon. You founded a pluralistic study for the Center of Judaism, yet you lobbied to have yeshiva students drafted into the army. You served as advisor to then Prime Minister Shimon Peres on diaspora Jewry, and you're presently the chairman of the parliamentary committee overseeing education and culture in Israel. What's more, you're married and the father of 4, for those who don't know.
That's not a contradiction.
Not at all. But if you take all of this into account, the question is, why did Avraham Burg, at the age of 40, want to become chairman of the Jewish Agency?
You know, the problem is not my answer. The problem is your question. Why asking a question like this?
What attracted you?
I'd love a position like this, which is, from my point of view, one of the single most important positions in the Jewish world, in Israel and outside of Israel, to be as attractive as possible, and as many frontliners from the Israeli politics will go there. The natural automatic reaction that this is a job which is the Israeli Bermuda Triangle, into which we send only our senior citizens. This is a shame. In diaspora, the generation of post-48 is taking over. In Israel, the post-48 generation is taking over. And even an old image organization like the Jewish Agency should be taken by my generation, and I'm the one.
In the distant past, the Jewish Agency was deeply involved in the settling of Jews in then British-mandated Palestine and helping build the state. In the more recent past, the agency channeled funds into the renovation of Israel's depressed neighborhoods. And in the last few years, it's brought in more than 500,000 new immigrants, largely from the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia. What do you want to do with the Jewish Agency?
Look, the question of my generation is not the question of the previous 2 Zionist links. The first one was the first 50 years we had a dream. Then for another 5 decades we fought in order to secure the dream. The question of my generation, and in the next 50 years, what will be the contents of this dream? So I think that the agency in my time, which is the eve of the 21st century, should be the agency which moves from a nation building to a community building, from philanthropy and charity to partnership, from the top of the echelons for people, Zionism was a photo opportunity with the Prime Minister, to a more concrete people-to-people, living bridges, connections that we didn't have before. Because in the end of the day, the challenge is not for you. The challenge is not for me. The challenge is for our children and our children's children.
You hinted at the fact that the Jewish Agency in the past has always survived on charity. You talk about partnership. What concrete terms might that partnership take?
It is too early for me to say because I'm less than 3 days in the job, and I promised myself, as I promised the people within the organization and outside, to dedicate the first 100 grace days to learn, and to learn. But there is one thing which is clear for me. If the Jewish agency won't be a relevant agency, it won't be. And when I say relevant, it should be relevant for the masses of Israelis who don't care too much, unfortunately, about the world Jewry, and it should be relevant for each and every Jew around the world who either decides to remain within the Jewish people, or those, unfortunately, who decided to evaporate, to mix marriage, to mix marry and to leave the Jewish people. These are my target populations. These are the people we have to develop new products and new marketings.
The agenda you've just described in terms of world Jewry has been called the maintaining of Jewish continuity, and many people believe that one of the ways in which that can be accomplished is through education. Do you have any ideas in that direction?
First, when they say Jewish continuity, which is a good Jewish buzzword recently, I ask, what do you continue? And when they give me the answer, I ask, and when you continue, where do you continue? There is no doubt that the highway between the past and the future is Jewish education, and after the Jewish people, in partnership, will accomplish the sacred mission of saving the distressed Jewry in the former Soviet Union and few other pockets of distressed Jewry. The agenda of the next century will be the question of who is a Jew. But then the answer will be not the halachic one. The answer will be, who is a Jew? A Jew is the one who has Jewish children, and this is Jewish education.
There are those, actually more than a few people, who believe that maybe the Jewish agency interests you for now, but your real goals a little further into the future have nothing to do with the Jewish agency, but using your present position as chairman of the agency as a platform to get back into Israeli politics and to go as high as you possibly can. What do you say to them?
Hey, what's wrong with it? Nobody wants a 40-year-old individual to retire from the Jewish agency. I do not intend to spend my life up until retirement, which is 30 years ahead, in the Jewish agency. And I think it will be only positive that one day at the highest echelon of the Israeli politics will be somebody who does not come from the battlefield, does not come from the wars and peace process and making, but somebody who's coming from education and Jewish people and Jewish continuity and Jewish solidarity. It will be a refreshing input. If I'll be the one, I'll be happy.
A different outlook from a young incoming chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel, Avraham Burg. Thanks very much for joining us today. And after the break, we're going to take a new look at the magic of Israel's Negev highlands. That's when Jerusalem Online continues. Jerusalem Online continues now, and we continue to take you north, south, east, and west in pursuit of all that is beautiful and interesting in this country, sometimes even inspiring. This week, we head south into the apparent wasteland of Israel's Negev Desert. At second glance, as you'll see, there's quite a lot there to explore and enjoy. More about that in this special report. The Ramon crater, at the center of Israel's largest nature reserve. 25 miles long, it's the largest geological formation of its kind in the world, a form unique to the Negev Desert. Its unique structure reveals rock formations of amazing beauty and color. At the Modern Visitors Center in Mitzpeh Ramon, you'll find interesting, understandable explanations of the crater's geological, biological, and archaeological phenomena. Enjoy a jeep tour, or take in the breathtaking vistas from the hump of a camel. Or ride a friendly llama. The Ramon Crater's unique ranch is home to the largest herd of alpacas and llamas outside South America. Crossing the crater, you'll discover one of the most important and beautiful trade routes of the ancient world, the Spice Road. Its Nabatean builders left their mark throughout the Negev highlands. Near the crater is the ancient Nabatean city of Avdat, among the most beautiful remains of that time. A 20th century contribution to the landscape, this unique sculpture garden overlooking the crater includes impressive works by artists from around the world. The Beirut campground offers a different experience, sweet tea and traditional Bedouin hospitality. Pitch your tent here for an unforgettable night's stay. Or if you miss the comforts of home, you're in for a pleasant surprise at the hotel in Mitzpeh Ramon. And what better way to end an exhilarating day than this, with the last rays of the setting desert sun. Mitzpeh Ramon and the Negev Highlands, an adventure to keep in mind for your next trip to Israel. There was adventure of a different sort recently at Jerusalem's Shaarei Tzedek Hospital with a huge crowd looking on. More about that right after this.
Jerusalem Online Headlines, I'm Miriam Hirschlag. Nearly half a year after Israel signed a peace treaty with Jordan, it has finally appointed an ambassador to Jordan. Professor Shimon Shamir was Israel's third ambassador to Egypt, but quit his post for ideological reasons when the right-wing Likud party came into power. He is a university professor who specializes in the Arab world and has for years been helping set up business deals between Israelis and Arabs. That should serve him well as Israel and Jordan continue to develop economic relations. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin has vetoed a proposal to allow female recruits to volunteer for fighting roles in the Israeli army. Rabin said he feared the possibility that a woman soldier would be taken captive, saying this could severely damage morale during wartime. But some women insist they should be allowed combat roles. One 23-year-old college student has gone to the Supreme Court to force the army to let her take the tests for becoming a fighter jet pilot. Israel wants to bring the Reverend Jesse Jackson to preach the gospel of nonviolence to Palestinians. That's according to the Maariv newspaper, which says the idea is for Jackson to visit mosques in the West Bank and Gaza Strip and speak against the terrorism advocated by Islamic extremist groups. The newspaper said the foreign ministry had issued the invitation, but no word yet on whether Jackson will say yes. Israel's education ministry has introduced an ambitious program to change sexual stereotypes among children. The approach begins in nursery school on up through high school and takes a close look at textbooks and children's literature. It also involves educating teachers to set equal standards for boys and girls and to encourage girls to take positions of leadership. And finally, it may be weeks away, but Purim is already in the air. The holiday is a joyful celebration of the rescue by a Jewish queen of the Jews of Persia from the evil Haman. Adults get tipsy and kids get dressed up. Judging from the costumes now on sale, it's already clear that this year's most popular Purim disguise is taken from the top kids' TV show in Israel, the Power Rangers. I'm Miriam Hirschlag for Jerusalem Online.
Israel is renowned as a center of advanced medical practice and research, but an operation performed recently at Jerusalem's Shaarei Tzedek Hospital attracted wider interest than usual. Some 3,000 cardiologists attending a convention in Washington, D.C. looked on live by satellite as doctors at Shaarei Tzedek performed a coronary stenting procedure. Joining me now is the director of Shaarei Tzedek's cardiology department, Professor Dan Tzivoni. Welcome, Professor Tzivoni. For the uninitiated, me among them, what exactly is a coronary stenting procedure and who needs one?
One of the ways to open blockage in the coronary arteries, those are the arteries providing blood to the heart itself, is by inflating a balloon and dilating the narrowing.
That's called angioplasty. That I know about.
Angioplasty. In about 30 to 50% of the patients, there is recurrence of the narrowing within 3 to 6 months, and about 3% of the patients there is a collapse of the artery during the angioplasty itself.
So what do you do?
What we do is we bring on top of a balloon a small metal tube that you can see here. This metal will bring on top of a balloon to the place of narrowing in the artery, and we inflate the balloon at this position, and here you can see this metal.
It expands.
When it is expanded, it keeps the artery, the wall of the artery, from collapsing, and it maintains blood supply to the heart.
Interesting. You brought some video with you that shows graphically, in fact, it's the video that was shown before these conventioneers in Washington, shows graphically how such an operation is performed. Let's take a look at the video, and please explain for us, Dr. Tzivoni, what we're seeing.
What we see here is the preparation for stent implantation. There is a puncture of an artery in the groin. It's called the femoral artery.
And that's a catheter that's about to be fed into it.
And the catheter is being fed through the groin, through a sleeve in the groin.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Almagor is now pushing the stent through the catheter, and you see the stent, the metal part, advancing into the artery. It's called the circumflex coronary artery. Now it's in place. You see the artery is blocked. There is no flow of contrast material or blood beyond it. Now the stent is expanded. You can see while the heart is beating, the stent is now expanded, and shortly you will see that the artery is patent after the inflation.
Meaning it's open, the blood is flowing and getting to where it's supposed to get, feeding the heart.
Here you see excellent blood flow beyond the obstruction, and hopefully the stent will maintain the blood flow through this artery.
Dr. Tzivoni, it's got to be kind of a pressurizing situation to perform an operation like that with 3,000 of the top people in the field looking on by TV.
Well, I believe that experienced people can work under pressure. We always work under pressure. So we performed, I think, very good job. And all the 3 patients that had a stent implantation, some of them even 3 stents in one procedure, are feeling very well, and they are all home by now.
How long does such a procedure take, and how much hospitalization has to follow it?
The procedure takes about from 1 hour to 4 hours, depends on the complexity of the procedure. Usually the patients are staying in the hospital for 2 days after the stent implantation. I just want to stress that if you compare it to a bypass operation, that the hospitalization takes about 8 to 10 days. This is a much shorter hospitalization.
So this is really an alternative to this more traditional, at this point, traditional bypass technique.
For patients with 1 or 2 narrowings in the artery, this can be an alternative to bypass surgery. And also for younger patients in whom we know that there is a high rate of recurrence of the narrowing in the vein grafts, within about 10 years, we can postpone the need for bypass surgery.
That's great. I noticed in the press release that I was given concerning the procedure that one of the surgeons on the team was a Palestinian surgeon. Does Shaarei Tzedek's location in Jerusalem influence this kind of cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians?
Let me correct you first. It's not a surgery. It's a procedure done
I stand corrected.
By advancing a catheter. We have very good relations with one of the cardiologists who is working in Nablus. His name is Dr. Hanbali. And he is working once a week. He brings patients from the area, and he does the procedure together with us.
One last question, because we're almost out of time. Shaarei Tzedek's Jesselson Heart Center is now among the most advanced facilities in this country. How does Israeli cardiovascular medicine compare in general to the kind of medicine that's practiced abroad?
If we compare the cardiology in Israel to cardiology in the States, I think that the citizens of Israel are getting medical care, cardiology care, at least on the average, as high as the citizens of the United States.
At least, you say?
At least, because the average person in Israel, I believe, gets maybe a better care than the average American. I know that there are very good, excellent centers in the United States in whom small percentage of the population gets an excellent care.
Well, maybe this can turn out to be Israel's next export industry, inviting people from abroad in to have their surgery done here. Professor Dan Tzivoni, head of the cardiology department at Shaarei Tzedek Medical Center in Jerusalem. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Another new step in medical practice, and in a few minutes, another step forward for Israeli singer Gitit Shoval. But first, this reminder, the Jerusalem Online POB is the address for all of your comments, questions, and suggestions. You're invited to send them to us at Jerusalem Online, POB 33003, Jerusalem, Israel. That's POB 33003 in Jerusalem. Or you can fax us at country code 972-238-1658. That's 972-238-1658. Remember, as always, to tell us when and on what station you watch Jerusalem Online, which continues right after this. We are back. My next guest is a popular Israeli singer whose career in the business spans more years than many of her older and better-known counterparts. But Gitit Shoval, on her way to a U.S. tour, has the kind of voice you're not going to forget once you've heard it, which you will in a segment from her song, Achshav Kfar Ken, and Now I Do. Gitit Shoval and her musical producer and husband, Ron Drian. sounds of Gitit Shoval joining us now, along with her husband, Ron Druyan. Very nice indeed.
Thank you.
Gitit, if memory serves me right, I first met you in the lobby of a Tel Aviv recording studio when you were 14 years old,
Yeah.
and with the voice of a 30-year-old. The voice has stayed the same. What have you been doing since then?
Since then, I studied. I cut 4 records, albums, and we are performing together all over the country.
And you married your producer.
Yeah.
I don't know actually which happened first, but never mind. Ron, how do you select the music? Is it something you do together, and on what basis do you do it?
We do it together, and Gitit has the biggest percentage of say, of course. But, you know, I know her voice, and I know what she is up to and what she can do. So it's a really together thing.
What kind of material do you most enjoy singing?
Soul.
Soul?
I think, yes, soul music. This is the most...
Black soul or
I don't know.
Jewish
if it's
soul
black.
or...
It's, Jewish soul.
It's American type of music, basically.
Okay, well, you're going to let the American audiences have a sampling of that kind of music when you go out on this U.S. tour. Where are you going to be and when?
Yeah, well, it's going to be through May, and we're starting Chicago, 4th of May.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the program is mixed between, you know, authentic Israeli music, our own original music, tunes that we wrote from our records.
And material in English, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also material in English, you know, things from Barbara Streisand that you'll hear, and Whitney Houston.
Well, very good. Well, that's something to look forward to. And if you'd like more information, the details about Gitit Shoval's upcoming U.S. tour, call Aviv Productions at this phone number, area code 201-489-3912. That's 201-489-3912. Gitit Shoval, Ron Druyan, thanks very much for joining us today. And we're going to conclude our show with a segment from another song you'll be performing on that tour, Papa, Can You Hear Me?, originally sung by Barbara Streisand in Yentl.
Yeah.
Until next week, thanks for joining us on this week's Look at the People of the Stories Behind the News. We will be back 1 week from today on Jerusalem Online. I'm Mike Greenspan. Shalom.
In all the world, in all the books, help me to face what lies ahead. The trees are so much taller, and I feel so much smaller. The world I see is so much bigger now that I'm alone. Papa, how I love you.